Thank you, and enjoy the show.
She's so earnest. I love her. Hi. Welcome to A Man's Guide for Appropriate Behavior in the 21st Century. I am your host, Scot Froelich. Pronouns are he, him. A few quick things, despite what the lovely person just said. You don't have to turn your cell phones off. You can leave them on. I ask that you leave them on silent and no flash photography and don't video it or anything. But if you would like to take notes, if you would like to live tweet, take some information down as you hear it, that's totally cool. You can do that. Please go ahead and feel free to leave your phones out. We will have a Q&A session for the last 10 to 15 minutes, give or take, of the discussion today. So if you do have something that you'd like to ask, jot it down on your phone, notepad, forearm, whatever, and save it for the end there. I do just want to make sure that we designate the first 45 minutes for our honored guests today. If the content gets a little heavy, which as you might have seen on the Fringe website, today's discussion has the potential to be, I want you to know that it's okay for you to take a step out. No one in the audience and no one on the panel is going to judge you for that. Just do know that the Fringe does have rules about no reentry. Finally, you may hear some terms today thrown around that you're not familiar with. That is okay. No one knows everything. We're all here to learn. Take those notes. We'll probably explain those as we go as well, but just feel free to take those notes and you can ask those questions later on as well. Today we are going to discuss violence, incels, men's rights activists, things of that nature. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our panelists. Pete, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Pete. Pronouns are he and his. I am a therapist, and I work a lot with kids who've experienced trauma, whether it would be maltreatment, violent loss, medical trauma, in a couple of situations, kids who've been in captivity for varying lengths of time. And then also adults who are still kind of processing through things that happened to them as kids, trauma that may have happened to them as kids. I also do a lot of work with organizations trying to help organizations as a whole understand trauma and how that might be affecting the people that are coming to see them, that work for them, or might be affecting the organization as a whole and just changing the whole culture of the organization. So those are the main things that I do.
Thank you, Pete. Justine?
Hi, I'm Justine Mastin, she, her pronouns. I am a psychotherapist. My specialties are marriage and family therapy and alcohol and drug counseling. And the population that I work the most with are folks that consider themselves outside the mainstream. So that's however they self-identify, but I work with a lot of geeks, gamers, punks, LGBTQIA folks, secular folks, folks in bigger bodies. Basically anyone who's felt unwelcome in traditional wellness environments has a place at Blue Box Counseling. So, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sawyer Plotz, and I am an educator. I work at the Sexual Violence Center, which is a nonprofit agency that has free support services for people who have experienced or been affected by sexual violence. So we have a 24-hour support line, we have counseling, we have support groups, and my role there is as the education program coordinator. So I do a lot of presentations and facilitate community discussions, and I work primarily with high school students. I've developed some presentations on consent and healthy relationships and gender norms and roles and how the ways that we think about gender influence the way that we treat people and things like that. And I go by they, them pronouns.
Thank you. So that's our panel for the day. We're going to go ahead and get started. Because of sort of the zeitgeist of men's rights activists and men sort of taking over the internetosphere, I just want to ask a real quick question to the panel. Is there such a thing as an alpha or beta male?
Seems Pete? To work okay for dogs. That could be taken a few ways. But I think, so this is just my thought, is that human society is too complex for such a simple construct. for animals, to a large degree, they're in a social circle, and humans are spread throughout social circles. And so a person who during the day might be, for appearance sake, seem to be that alpha male, when they go and do their job at night is on the bottom rung and everybody makes fun of them. So you get, I think, too much of a fluctuation to have a true alpha male. I think that there are males that use influence one way or the other, and studies seem to indicate that there are some biological markers for that. But I don't think there's an all-out alpha male. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I'm gonna, if you were here last Saturday, I was on another panel about dating and relationships, and I'm gonna have the same answer that I did last time, which is only on the internet is this a thing that exists and is a social norm. And I think what has happened is men in certain corners of the internet have gotten together and created this society where these are the norms. And really, it's men policing other men. And we'll talk so much more about this today, where the impression is that women are policing men. But that is an instance where I think we can point right to those corners of the internet where men are policing other men about their alpha, beta, cuck, soy boy status.
Oh, soy boy.
Soy boy.
Can you explain soy boy?
I can't. I can't. I mean, like, sure, it's a derogatory term for a dude that doesn't want to partake in this whole thing. And so someone who's kind of, opted out, perhaps someone that identifies, a man who identifies as a feminist, would probably fall into soy boy category. So perhaps you can just go ahead and take that on.
Is it like if they're a vegetarian and they eat soy? I mean, is that honestly
Sure. Because I think it's feminizing, right?
Right.
To be a vegetarian.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I think.
Yeah.
Right. These are social norms that we don't buy into, but people do.
The only times I've heard that term is like kind of making fun of people who would actually call someone that, but I wondered, like, is that where that comes from?
Yeah.
Wow.
And like the idea that like men don't want to recycle because it might make them look gay, is that
right?
This was an art. Yeah, this just came out this week.
And I had to think: is this satire or is this actually like there's been research and this has been found that?
Yeah, no, it's real.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that bugs the crap out of me, because I mean, it's like, ooh, it might be good. That can't be masculine.
Right? Because everything masculine is in some way controlling your environment or damaging it in some way. Or
Yeah.
it's like the guy rolling coal. The guys who like they disengage the diesel controls on their truck so that they can blow black smoke out the back of their truck. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where does I lost my place. I swear I'm an amateur at this. Not like I swear I'm good at this, right? Getting a little bit at that, there are guys, men, whatever, who in my years writing the blog have referred to me as self-loathing, white knighting, things of that nature, and that kind of fits into a little bit of this hating something just because it's it might be good, sort of thing. Where does that kind of psychology come from? Like if someone is afraid of looking like they're kind, or where does that, like, psychologically, where does that come from?
I mean, I think unfortunately a lot of times it comes from parents. I don't know if anybody has seen the film The Mask You Live In. It's about the way that we, and when I say we, I mean like as a broader society, the way we raise boys, and how like when little boys are they might fall down and skin their knee and cry, or even cry because they got left out of a game or something. And like, we allow them to do that up to a certain point, but then I don't know exactly, I'm sure it varies from family to family, and fortunately this never happens in some families, but there are plenty of families where they start to reinforce a message when they're like 8, 9, 10, that like, oh, brush yourself off, get up, don't cry, don't be weak, don't be too sensitive. And sometimes I think parents feel like, I'm trying to help you and do you a favor, because if you act like this at school, then the other boys are gonna like push you around or bully you or make fun of you. And so I don't want you to be one of those boys that's perceived as weak or a sissy, or all of those words that are like derogatory words for boys who aren't like macho enough. And so I think, like, when you said, where does it come from? I think sometimes, it comes from all kinds of influences, right? There's media, there's TV, internet, all kinds of stuff. But I think it can come from parents, and when I say parents, it's coming from moms sometimes too, who don't want a boy to be like, too much of a crybaby. And so a lot of these messages get ingrained very young, I think.
They can be incredibly harmful too. I mean, so just take messages, like you said, media. If you've seen the movie The Reader, this would be an example. In the movie The Reader, the main male character, when he is an adolescent, ends up meeting an adult female, and in the movie they have a caring, loving sexual relationship. That's like child abuse. And he liked it. And you've got The Graduate, where he's just barely 18. And so we get these messages throughout media, throughout society as a whole, that says, hey, if you're a guy and get sexually abused by a female, you got so lucky. And if you actually feel like you got abused, there's obviously something wrong with you for feeling like you got abused, rather than being grateful. And we get these messages. You wouldn't see those messages flipped, hopefully.
Yeah, and so if we go even further back, again, those of you who saw me last week are going to get the same speech you got last time, but for new people, welcome. I'm going to talk just a skoch about something called social constructionism, which is my favorite topic. It's why it comes up every time. So social constructionism is the idea that as we live together and spend time together as human beings, norms begin to form, and we create societies and rules, and over time these become irrefutable facts, but they're not. We just start to take them that way. And so what this means is that there's no objective reality, there's only subjective reality. And so if that's the case, then we can question it, and we can, is everybody over 18? We can opt how do you feel about swearing? You can opt the fuck out of that and decide to do things differently. So somewhere, who knows when, we as a culture decided that it's okay for young boys to sexualize their teachers, their female teachers, or their women teachers. And we're like, so go ahead, go forth, have at it. But we decided these other things weren't okay. And now we can start going, well, shit, if we created that, we can deconstruct it too. So we're getting to a point, I hope, where we're all starting to look around and go, wait, is that thing serving me? Or is it in fact not serving me and in fact really fucking harming me? And so that was a little bit of where does it come from and where does it go?
I thank you for the segue. This gets me to incels. Is there anyone here who does not know what an incel is? It is totally okay if you don't. So I wrote up a quick thing here. So aside from incels equals involuntary plus celibate. So despite the grammatical impossibility of that, these men determine fairness as how many women they've slept with, negging themselves and other incels for having slept with anyone, much less multiple people, and the idea that men should be guaranteed sex simply for being nice, that if life were fair, they'd be getting some instead of the alpha males, right? So these are guys who consider themselves beta males. There's been a construct created whereby they've defined masculinity in this certain way, and if they're not meeting it, they're, not men, I guess. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was radicalization and online extremism, because one guy having that thought by himself isn't a problem. Well, it is. He's got his own problems, right? And he may hurt people, right? But when these guys radicalize each other, they give each other ideas. And we have a van that drives into a crowd of women in Toronto. And we have a guy who shoots up a sorority house in San Diego. And that's two of God knows how many incidents. How did that construct come to be, and how do we combat that? And if you don't have an exact answer, we'll talk through it. It's totally
Start with social construction.
Yeah, well, so incels are a bummer for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is that creating portmanteau is my most favorite form of linguistic playfulness. And so it just makes me angry that they used portmanteau for evil.
And they did it wrong. Sorry.
See? It's upsetting.
So that's not even getting to what they actually do.
No, it's not.
Right.
It's not. It's just on the face of it. It's just the language. So here's the deal. Not only can society organically create itself, it can choose to create itself, and it can create preferred realities. So if your preferred reality is that all women are bitches who are out to get me, yes, you can think that. You can just not. You can exist all by yourself and think that. But why? Why be all by yourself and think this when you can create a preferred reality where other people don't just agree with you, but they reinforce you, and you've got yourself a nice little feedback loop where you've now got other people who agree with you and support you and egg you on. So what's happened in these little communities, which, spoilers, incels, the first forum for incels was actually created by a queer woman who was trying to create a conversation about how, for folks that are having trouble dating. And it got corrupted. But that's how it started. The intention was positive, and then folks got together and were like, how can I destroy this? How can I take this force for good and just fucking destroy it? And I'll get off my soapbox now.
I think too, it's interesting just to listen to the rhetoric and the talk and the ideas behind it. I think a couple of key things to see in it are, one, that sense of entitlement and the view of sex as an entitled thing, so that the other person doesn't really even have value and importance as an individual. And so it's all about just me. And it's so centered around being treated as though I'm not good enough, which I think often actually comes down to a personal belief that I'm not good enough. And so I think that might actually be the starting point for a lot of people, and it might be for multiple reasons. One, having no sense of how who they actually are fits into an idea of masculinity, how who they are fits into the world around them, It may be related to messages they've received throughout their life of their own inadequacy, whether it came from family or friends or teachers or other people, that then has gotten internalized, and now it's this uncertainty and the self-doubt, and then they strive to grab some indicator that it's not true. And they've felt that instead they've gotten confirmation. And so now they're angry at the people who have confirmed you're not good enough.
I want to piggyback on that for just 1 second, because I love that you came at it from that angle, because I think what incels are really missing is that they should want to be feminists and tearing down the patriarchy.
Right.
Because the patriarchy
Right.
is what has created these images of masculinity. Because sure, is there some biological stuff around why we're attracted to some people over other people? Sure. But media is so much stronger than our biology at this point. You know? Like, look at what the expectation of what women and men should look like decade by decade. And that challenges our biology, like, whoa. So, really, their beef should be with the patriarchy, not with women. Take that, incels.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I haven't like done a lot of research, and I don't have any particular like expertise about incels at all. I mean, I'm only kind of familiar on the surface with those ideas, but I tend to take a very optimistic view of human nature, and that, you know, we're all just looking for love and belonging and validation, and I think something goes terribly wrong when the ways that people are finding belonging and validation is in these like dark corners of the internet. And you know, but I think like Pete, what you were saying, that feeling of inadequacy and that fear of like, am I always going to be lonely? And you know, I'm not as, you know, I wasn't good at sports, and I wasn't, you know, and my father always favored my older brother, and you know, whatever kind of really negative, toxic messages they've gotten about what masculinity is and how they don't measure up to it, or what you are supposed to do in order to be a man, and feeling like they don't have it, or at least they're supposed to have it. They want to have it, and women owe them sex. And if it's not, you know, rather than doing some reflection on like, well, how can I meet the kind of women that I'm interested in? How can I develop a healthy relationship and communicate what I'm looking for? It's like they don't, for some reason, they haven't developed those skills or found those places of belonging, and they've been like infected with these really like poisonous ideas about what relationship. I mean, I don't even know if they talk about relationships. It seems like they more just think that they should be entitled to sex, and that any kind of like, well, if I hold the door for you, or if I do something nice, and you know, you women are just interested in these guys that treat you like shit anyway, and I was nice to you and you didn't like have sex with me, and so and it's like, how quickly can like, you know, a compliment or a favor or something like that turn into like, well, she's such a bitch because she wouldn't date me. And it's like, yeah, there's something that gets like, has to get like all the way unwound in order to get at like what that really is. But I think they're looking for a story, like what will explain like why my life feels like it sucks and why I'm not the kind of man that I was supposed to be or wanted to be. And yeah, instead of the self-reflection or like, how can I grow and be better as a person, which we, you know, we all have that ability, they're finding their fuel in this really scary place.
I like that y'all went down that direction, because like one of the next questions I had here was about nice guys. There's a very famous tweet that's been out for quite a while now that people keep retweeting. Women are not machines that you put kindness coins into until sex falls out. Is kindness and being a nice guy a virtue in and of itself? And what responsibility does the media have for demonstrating that as the expectation?
I'm probably going to say my most divisive thing right now, which is saying something. So I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm not originally from Minnesota. And when I moved here, I discovered that there was this thing called Minnesota Nice, where people are nice, but it's a lie. It's performative niceness. We are performing niceness for the function of question mark. When I first moved here, it was a big ass question mark. I did not understand what this performative niceness was about. I just assumed it was nice because, you come from the East Coast and someone says something nice to you and you're like, I don't know what to do with that. And then I learned that it has strings. It has all these strings. And it has all these hidden meanings. And it has all of this stuff attached to it. It's not niceness just to be nice. And that's not to say there aren't perfectly nice people in Minnesota. I am not saying that. But the construct of Minnesota nice is performative. And I think when we're talking about nice guys, that is performative niceness. We are being nice for the purpose of sexual intercourse. That is the function of my niceness. And I'm going to get one of two things out of it. I'm either going to get sexual gratification from my performative niceness, or I'm going to get an excuse to be a dick when people don't appreciate my performative niceness. And isn't that great? I never need to actually, be an authentic human being and figure out who I am. I can just perform niceness. And that was the most divisive thing I will probably say.
And isn't that that's the turnaround time in on Tinder or dating apps or something like that, where they're doing their performative niceness, and then they get shot down, and it instantly
fuck you, bitch. You're ugly anyway.
You're ugly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow, real nice guy.
Right.
Right. Yeah, that's the irony of it. It's like,
yeah.
Well, and I think too, it's because the question is niceness even is niceness even a thing? Is kindness a thing? And what I would say is what you're describing, which is how we often do niceness, isn't nice.
No, it's not.
It's mean. I mean, if I were to, stand and my fly's open and I say, hey, do I look okay before I get up on this panel? Sure, you look great. And now I'm in front of the panel with my fly open. That's not really something I would consider nice. But we forget that if our niceness is to get something out of the person, or our niceness is because we're afraid of the truth, or our niceness is because we're afraid of conflict, or our niceness is because we've learned our opinion doesn't matter, so why would I even give it? Then we've stepped away from what niceness actually is and kindness actually is, which is really putting your good over mine.
Ooh, that'd be a real soy boy situation, wouldn't it? To truly put someone's good in front of yours.
Someone want to make me that shirt?
We'll be calling you that at home.
You're welcome.
So one of the other topics that I had down here was about the red pill and men's rights activists. Does anyone not know what the red pill is? Awesome. So has everyone seen The Matrix at least? And there's the scene in The Matrix where he says you can leave the Matrix and you can become part of reality if you take the red pill, or you take the blue pill and you stay brainwashed by the machine. So there was a man in Massachusetts running for state legislature back in 2012, 2013, something like that, who decided that he knew what women wanted more than they did. And that the reality was that they wanted to be treated like crap by these, alpha males and what have you. And so he created a forum on Reddit called the Red Pill. And if you listen to him, you were finally taking the red pill and you were finally going towards reality. Whereas, based on what I'm hearing from the panel here, the actual red pill would be to recognize the patriarchy.
Yep, and that's why I use the Matrix anytime I give presentations, because they don't get Keanu, okay? We're taking him back.
I totally...
It's hard to follow up.
Come on, it's Keanu. Who hasn't seen all of the amazing Keanu memes lately? Jeez.
I'm so sorry. Shall I talk more about Keanu?
while you're finding your
Please, go ahead.
I'll just say that I have seen The Matrix, but I saw it for the very first time like a couple weeks ago. So
Whoa.
Wow.
I know.
What's that like?
Mine was giving me a hard time. Like, how can you not have seen The Matrix? You grew up in the '90s. And you're trans, and I was like, okay, yeah, what now? Like, what does that have to do with it? And I don't know if anybody's ever heard that angle on The Matrix, but first of all, the writers, producers are trans women who are sisters.
Yep.
And when they made it, they were not out as trans yet, but they are now, and there's like so many things in the film that are like an allegory or a metaphor of a transgender experience or of what it can be like. And so I was reading a ton about the Matrix and like that whole angle. And then I came across something about the red pill and the men's rights activists. And I was like, how in the world did they get that from the same film that I'm just getting all this like other perspective on? And like, yeah, it was, I still don't think I quite understand that, like how the whole red pill idea of what reality is resonates with men's rights activists.
Right.
Because the most effective lie is built on truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have started calling it black pilling.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
There's also black pilling,
What's that?
which is sort of like the nihilistic acceptance that nothing will ever get better.
Oh.
So there's also now black pilling. So they're taking this narrative, and now we've put our spin on it, and we're making it our language. And no, I say no, sir. I say not today, Satan.
Pete, you and I had spoken previously about fear being a big motivator for people, and particularly for people in a position of privilege. And so a lot of these folks involved in these communities are cis white men. Can you talk a little bit, right? Shocker.
But not all cis white men are that.
Right. Because you have to say that, apparently. It's because they get defensive.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
There are plenty of people of color on the on the boards for MRA.
Oh, yeah.
So unfortunately, yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about fear of losing status and how it can be perceived as discrimination?
Sure. Well, a lot of times the way we perceive our position relative to others is just, is this what I've grown up with? Is this what I've experienced? And like, from your perspective, it's like this. When in reality, it's like this. But you don't see that. And so then when something happens that maybe lessens that power gap just a little bit, and then another thing happens that might lessen it just a little bit, in reality, you're still here, but now you're only 3 inches above the other one, and you used to be a foot. And even though you're still in the position of power, it is a relative decrease in power, which feels like a loss of power. And so I think that people start feeling that, and they feel fear, in part because we've learned to rely on that power. And what are we going to do if we don't have that relative power anymore? I mean, if I'm getting jobs because I'm a white guy, and now I don't have the benefit of being a white guy, so I get extra privilege, am I going to stack up? How am I going to compare? Well, if I no longer stack up, obviously they favored the woman, they favored the black guy. And so it's that fear of I've lost some relative power, and that feels like I'm down here even though I'm still up here. And part of it is not knowing who we are and a fear that we're going to lose ourselves, because if our identity is based in that power and then we start losing that power, it's not just about the power being less, it's that I've lost part of who I am. And that creates fear. And I think incels or other groups, men's rights movement, I think one of the roles that fear plays in that is, so I talk to my not my parents, but parents that are in therapy with me all the time who have like this really intense, strict, almost extreme parenting approach. And what it usually goes by is, nope, that's okay. No, I can't do anything. I can't do anything anymore. I can't do anything as a parent anymore. Society does not allow us to do anything as a parent anymore. And then boom, explosion. And then they go back to, I can't do anything as a parent anymore. I can't spank, so what can I do? I can't talk harshly to my kids, so what do I do? And they feel powerless until there's a boom. And what's the boom? I feel powerless, and so now I'm going to try and grab my power back because of fear. And what we see, I think, a lot of times in these situations is, I feel powerless, so I'm going to try and grab my power back. Boom. And that's fear driving it, in my opinion.
And how does that, and this is for the whole panel, not necessarily just poor Pete, how does that play out on the people around the privileged person? How does that play out on women, people of color, LGBTQ plus? Like, how does the rest of the world look at that?
Yeah. Well, so if we look at it from the perspective of the dude, it would feel very lonely because he's not getting validated, right? Because if your experience is, I didn't get this job because of this other person, and that's your narrative, and that feels true to you. I heard something. Does anybody listen to Love It or Leave It? Thank you. If you like Pod Save America, I think you're really going to like Pod Save America. And then I think you're really going to like Love It or Leave It. But he had someone on speaking about this exact topic because of the horrific mass shootings last week. And what this knowledgeable scholar, whose name I can't come up with right now, said was, for some folks, their emotions are reality. So what they feel is truth. So if I feel disappointed that this person got this job over me, it is fact that my employer is racist. That is fact. I am downtrodden. That is fact. Whereas, like, sure, your reality is this really hard thing happened and you're upset. Like, yes, I can validate that. I can validate that you are upset and this terrible thing happened to you. I can't validate that your employer is racist. I don't know that. I mean, I can validate that society's kind of racist, but that's not what we're talking about right now. So the idea that emotion is truth can be difficult, because if you are a person who really feels this way, the people around you aren't going to validate that. And so you will feel continually alone, and you will keep reaching for the people who are going to validate you. And who are those folks? Those are the folks on your Reddit subreddit who think the way you do, and they're going to say, yeah, man, you're right. That is how it is. And you're like, thank you. I feel validated. You are my friend. This is my reality. And people become more and more and more isolated away from other human beings with other opinions and thoughts that may help shift them away from it.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Scott, like power, and as people are feeling a loss of power and how they're trying to grab it back, like you were saying. I just think of, I mean, the field that I work in is sexual assault advocacy. And so, I mean, that's absolutely what comes to mind. Like the whole continuum of sexual violence, everything from like catcalling that happens on the street, which is all about power. Like I'm gonna, you know, you can try to say like, oh, I'm just talking to her because she's cute, or I'm giving her a compliment, or I'm telling her to smile, I'm trying to like brighten her day or whatever. And it's like, no, it is about inserting yourself into this person's, usually a woman's, day, with your thoughts, your commentary, in a way that, regardless of your intent, it comes across as threatening. And even if you think you're saying something nice, it's like, how fast does, you know, if she doesn't smile, or she doesn't stop to talk, or doesn't give you her number, like how often is the next comment like something really derogatory, or even just like not taking no for an answer, or continuing to follow, or say things. And I do a lot of presentations in schools, and we talk a lot about what consent is, and like what conditions have to be there in order for consent to be genuine. And so, you know, we talk about how, like, yes, there can't be any like physical force where someone, you know, is being like made to do something against their will, but we also talk about coercion. So like that pressure or manipulation, or things that are just said verbally to make someone feel like they don't really have a choice. And I think all of that is really important. But I think in order to really reduce sexual violence, we have to talk about power. Because so often it is, in fact, I want to even say like all the time, it's not about like someone misunderstanding consent. I think sometimes that can happen, but I think so much more of the time it's like people who sexually harass and sexually assault and rape women. It's not that they don't understand what consent is, it's that the power that they hold and the attitudes that they have and what they believe about women, that they're just like an object, or they're there for, you know, my own pleasure or whatever. But ultimately that power that they hold makes them feel entitled to get whatever they want, and makes them believe that they're going to get away with it. So it doesn't actually matter if I'm like, you know, using my power to hurt this person or to get my own sexual gratification met. And so with the lashing out that you talked about, I just think of all the ways that that gets channeled in like a sexually violent way. And I think it's the root cause of so much violence. You know, we've been talking a lot about like extremists, but these ideas and behavior patterns are things that we see like all across society. Because people are much more likely to be sexually assaulted by someone they know versus a stranger. Yeah. You know, so yeah, I could go on about that, but I'm sure we've got some more questions.
And that's for kids and adults.
Right. Yeah.
And what's a common denominator is a difference in power again. It's a difference in power again. And part of it is, too, not an additional consideration that I think is sometimes there is, I get that you're saying no, but that's because you don't know how good it actually is going to be. And you don't know what you actually want, but I do. And there's your red pill.
Yeah.
So I just don't want to leave it on that note. So I want to get to a couple of audience questions, but so with thinking that, and thank you, Sawyer, so much for bringing it down to, because we're talking about extremism or what have you, but bringing it down to that this is in our daily relationships, and this is a very real ground level thing. What can we as a society do to try to get better?
Well, we absolutely have to do something. So, I mean, seriously, what we are looking at now is by the time they're 18, depending on the study that you look at, somewhere between a fourth and a third of females will be sexually assaulted. By the time they're 18, somewhere between a fifth and a sixth of boys will be sexually assaulted. Probably higher because there is so much pressure on males to not complain about it, because it must have been good, right? Unless it was a guy, in which case you're gay.
Yeah.
So it's huge, and it's not just the sexual violence. It's in a survey of adults. Over, I think it was 44% of adults reported that at least once during their childhood, they were hit to the point of injury. So I'm not getting into is spanking right or is spanking wrong. I'm saying hit to the point of injury, 44%. So we have to do something, because it's in the sexualized violence, it's in the physical violence, it's in domestic abuse, and so much. Things that we can do. Have discussions like this. This is huge. Empower people to speak up. Look at consequences. One of the things that I think is huge is that a number of states right now are removing the statute of limitations for a sexual assault. That is huge, because what does that mean? That means that since it takes me so long to report, and we know that it usually takes a while to report, by the time I report, we can't do anything. And so now that's being removed. That's a huge step.
Mm-hmm.
Change the culture. Have the discussion. I think we need to look at what role power plays in it.
Can I piggyback off that? So let's talk about microactivism for a minute. We tend to think of activism in the macro, so the big stuff, marches, letter writing campaigns, sit-ins, but so much more activism happens at the macro or at the micro level, at the tiny level, and that is our individual choices day to day. So yes, it's more macro than micro, but each one of you is taking something in, and you're going to go out in the world, and the way that you implement these new ideas and thoughts and ways to think about them is you doing microactivism. So each time we make a choice to change our language, to speak about these things in a different way, to allow ourselves to be wrong, and to let other people know that something is not okay with what they said. In the activist community, there's an idea of calling in rather than calling out. If that's a new concept for you, calling out is like, yo man, that was sexist. That's a call out. A call in would be like, hey dude, can you come here for a second? That thing that you just said, I don't know if you know this, but that thing that you just said is actually a derogatory term for a woman. And it's not okay with me that we use that language. And you can energetically feel how that's different. People are afraid of call-out culture. But, if you're just like, hey buddy, hey peer, I see things differently. I don't know if you knew that. And if you did, you get to decide to say, fuck you, I'm never gonna follow that. But, it is my microactivism to say something and to bring that into the social consciousness. And so each one of us doing these micro acts every day is like throwing a pebble into water. It has ripples infinitely outward. And so I invite you to go out and be kick-ass micro-activists, and that's how we're going to change the world.
Yeah, and as an educator and as a parent, I just always think about kids and young people, and there's a documented link between a belief in rigid gender norms, like, you know, believing that men are supposed to be like leaders and bold and aggressive and violent and not emotional, and women are supposed to be, you know, all the opposite of that. Like, people who think that way, there is a link between that set of rigid beliefs and the likelihood of becoming a perpetrator of sexual violence. And so that's a kind of a scary link. But also, I just, like, one thing that I try to do as an educator and as a parent of two boys. I have a boy who's about to turn 7, and then I have a baby boy who's 9 months old. And I know some of you might be parents, and even if you're not, I think most of us, like, you might have nieces and nephews or grandkids or neighbor kids or whoever is a younger person in your life. It's someone that you have the opportunity to influence or just like have some kind of relationship with. And I think any time that we send a message to young people, and really people of any age, that like it's okay to just be who you are regardless of what your gender is. Like, you can you know, I'm thinking with my 7-year-old, like, we talk about this all the time. Like, there's not rules for what like boys have to play with and what girls have to play with. Like, you can play with anything you want. You can wear any colors that you're interested in. You can, you know, there's not any limits on you in that way. Because I think there's such a tendency to know how like that type of thinking negatively impacts girls, which it totally does. But it puts like constraints and boxes around boys too, who just want to express themselves and, you know, in whatever kind of way feels natural to them. And I just think the more that we can encourage an expanded idea of gender roles, that is a way of trying to equalize the, you know, a lot of the damage that the patriarchy has done. Because the more that, I mean, I'm hoping that like my kids are going to grow up believing like I'm a person and this is a person over here, and like we both have the right to be safe and respected and to get to make our own choices about how we express ourselves, and also like what we do with our bodies and in our relationships. And, you know, like I'm not better or stronger or above anybody else because of gender or for any other reason. And so I think the more that we can reinforce that, we can start to change some of this stuff.
Thank you very much. I love having the solution steps because I gotta write this stuff up later. So if I don't have that, then I'm missing something. And that's what we gotta have to move forward. While we're still here, we have like 5 or 6 minutes left. Does anybody have a question for our panel today?
Justine, I really loved what you said about social construction, right? Social constructivism. You know, the way that it can be powerful to challenge what's taken for granted as objective truth. Right? I'm really disturbed though by the fact that I feel like reactionaries or people who feel that their relative power is being threatened, the way that we're talking about, weaponize that sort of notion of social constructionism and say like, oh, well, feminism has become this sort of like taken for granted set of norms that are poisoning me, and now I need to take the red pill and check out of that, right?
Right.
So I feel like there's a complicated problem there, which is like, you know, how do we address that there's got to be a way to have some sense of objective, like climate change is really happening. We can't just like break that down. You know what I mean? Like, and also still do the work that we want to do to recognize that things that are socially constructed need to be challenged. You know, I feel like that's really at the heart of a lot of these problems because of the way that men's rights types are weaponizing this sort of like anti-truth stuff. You know? What do you make of that? How do we navigate that?
Yeah, and that's really fair. And, you know, because the thing is, we're all using the same tool. right? We're just, we are seeing things differently. And that's the beauty and the danger.
Right.
So what I invite folks to do is not just find your community, but see if you can bridge the gap into other communities so that we are constantly challenging each other's realities. And that's what happens when we're talking about the extremist examples. It becomes a closed system. And that's when the danger happens, because those closed systems, nothing can come in, but unfortunately, lots of shit comes out. And so if we allow ourselves to be open enough to keep engaging in conversations with folks, to continue challenging their reality, it's really powerful. There's been some, not a ton of studies yet on incels, but there's been some great journalism where folks have gone in and talked to people who came out of the incel movement, and really the answer was getting more perspective, seeing other people's reality and having it challenge their own. So continuing to be open, engage with people that cause us discomfort, which is not an answer anybody likes. But if we're able to be open and say, hey man, I hear that that's your reality. Here's mine. And I'm not telling you how to live your life, and you're certainly not going to tell me how to live mine. But there is this alternate reality. I work with some folks that have come out of fundamentalist religious backgrounds, and that's very much a chosen preferred reality. And the way those folks were able to come out of it was expanding their horizons. So that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And then do we have another question back there?
Oh yeah, was the men's rights movement originate with some well-intentioned desire to challenge the orthodox gender norms put up upon males that were growing up, and was it like later hijacked or something?
Well, I think you were talking about how the Red Pill movement started with being well-intentioned.
Well, yeah, so the original incel forum was created by a queer woman to basically say, hey, people who are having trouble with relationships, let's all get together and talk about it. And it was men and women and all together answering each other's questions. And then
Spreading out.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, as far as men's rights activism specifically, there are a number of, like, Good Men Project. Has anybody heard of that? That it started very much with this, and they still do to this day, put out a lot of really good material. But you can kind of see as you pay attention to things on those websites that there are those creeping influences. And so I don't know if there was actually a specific men's rights activist movement that got co-opted as much as there was probably a well-intended person who's like, hey, these definitions don't define me, but anyone got any better ideas? And then, well, so I don't know if there was a specific movement. Was that the question? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got the 2-minute signal.
Oh, we got the 2-minute signal. Thank you.
If you know someone who is in a relationship with an abusive person or a toxic person, what is one of the best things we can do to maybe help them realize the situation that they're in and help them disengage? Sawyer. Sorry.
Yeah. It can be really tough to watch someone that you care about be in and stay in a relationship that is abusive in any way. Sometimes if it's like verbally abusive or emotionally abusive, people might not even recognize or register that that's what's happening if they think, well, I'm not being physically beaten up. I think that one of the easiest things to misunderstand, though, as someone who is not in that relationship, is that, like if it was really that bad, they would just leave, or else, like, you know, it's so hard for me to see you do that. I have to just like disengage from you because you're just, you know, as long as you stay, it's not going to get any better. And even without trying to be, those kinds of ideas can come across as really like victim blaming. So, because there are so many dynamics at play where the person in the abusive relationship is like just trying to survive and basically anticipate
And now we're
the
getting
abusive
cut off.
person's next move. And so just saying like, I'm here for you, I'm concerned, I want you to be happy and feel safe, and you can talk to me anytime, and there are like resources out there for you. I've got some brochures that if people are interested, they can, but yeah, letting them know that you're there and that you don't blame them for the situation is.
Thank you very much.